Hello again, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of CaneSport's Inside the Lines. And today we have a special treat for you. We're going to go inside the Alabama Crimson Tide with Tony Tsoukalas from BamaInsider.com and the ultimate expert on Bama football. And Tony, you guys have been having a lot of fun up there in Tuscaloosa for many years now and coming off a national championship. And it's reload time for Nick Saban, something that he seems to do very well. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the 2021 Alabama team, why don't you just give us a general overview of the feeling around the program right now, coming off the national championship, and how they feel going into next season?
Yeah, Alabama's certainly riding a high right now. I mean, look, they're coming off an undefeated season. Nick Saban's just his second undefeated season at Alabama. You could argue it's the best team he's ever had. They're also coming off of last week. They had the number one class and the highest rated recruiting class in Rivals history. So it just seems like the present's bright, and now it looks like the future's still bright for Alabama. Obviously, they're going to be losing a lot of players in the NFL draft, in this offseason, but they should still have a pretty good team coming back. And like you said, look, it's exciting times for Alabama. It's been a fun ride, and it looks like it's going to keep on going for at least a little while.
Well, they got a lot to replace. You mentioned the great recruiting class that they just put up, and that's like an annual tradition in Tuscaloosa. Unfortunately for everybody else in college football, they just keep getting great players after great players. And we debate this a lot at CaneSport. People talk about player development, game planning, schemes on game day. But I've always felt that ultimately that the number one barometer of whether teams are successful or not is what they get done in recruiting and the quality of personnel. Coaches come and go. That's certainly been the case at Bama. They seem to switch coordinators almost every year. Guys get head coaching jobs. Assistant coaches come and go. Nick, he just recycles them through there like crazy. But the constant to me from the outside looking in is the talent that they always have at Alabama. Year after year after year. And, so obviously now they got to replace, a Najee Harris at running back. They got to replace a Mac Jones, Devonta Smith, who was absolutely sensational at wide receiver, along the lines of Jerry Jeudy and Calvin Ridley. They just keep stacking elite great players after elite great players. But the thing I think people forget is that Alabama was once coming from a place where really like Miami is right now, just, a team fighting for relevance in college football, a team that just couldn't really get out of its way and win anything. And then they finally struck magic with Nick Saban, and he obviously has taken the program back to its glory days. So, just in general, what's it been like for you guys covering the team to just see this constant reloading going on every year and just the standard of excellence that he has been able to maintain in bringing in players regardless of who's on the staff?
It really feels like a machine. Like you said, look, most teams, when you look at replacing what Alabama did with the skilled players, it would seem like an impossible task, something that might put your program back a couple of years just because, how do you replace Mac Jones and Najee Harris and Devonta Smith? You could argue that those three and they basically were last season the three best players at their positions, but when you look at it, look, Alabama has, replacing Mac Jones, they have a 5-star quarterback in Bryce Young, who was the number one quarterback in last year's class. Replacing Najee Harris, they have a stacked running back room, and they just added the number one running back in this year's class. And when you look at, their wide receiver position, they just brought in four receivers ranked in the top Rivals 100. So it's crazy how Nick Saban's just able to reload. And I just talked about the people that, were recently brought in. That happens every year. So there's guys like John Mechie who gets to step up now at that receiver core. We saw him a little bit last year. Trey Sanders is coming off of back-to-back season-ending injuries, but he's a guy that can really he's a talent at the running back position. I mentioned Bryce Young. They've got young guys on the offensive line that are ready to rise up as well. It's really just the recruiting machine of Alabama, bringing in that talent, and then it's well coached as well. Nick Saban does a good job of building staffs, and I think the reason behind that is he can sell advancement. I mean, if you're a part of Nick Saban's class, you're probably going to move on within 1 or 2 years to a different you're going to move on to a different, probably promotion of a job. And I think you can kind of sell that. It's almost kind of like how one and done coaches in basketball kind of sell that is, come here, develop yourself, move on. And Alabama will get the next big time coach. But look, this offseason, Alabama brings in Doug Marrone and Bill O'Brien, 2 NFL coaches. Bill O'Brien's going to coach the offense and Doug Marrone's going to coach the offensive line.
I mean, that's crazy.
Programs bring in 2 NFL coaches, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous. But I think he sells them, like you said, in that this will advance your career. Like look how many of the guys leave Saban's staff and go and become head coaches, and most of them very successfully. I mean, you have an occasional blip, like a Pruitt at Tennessee, but for the most part, they're extremely successful. Every single one of them. You look at what Mario Cristobal is doing out at Oregon. Kirby Smart, obviously, at Georgia. So it's worked out well, and he's not just blowing smoke up people's butts. Like, he's selling something really tangible. All right, so you mentioned...
I think he's doing a good job of getting a mix in, too. I think you got guys like Doug Marrone and Bill O'Brien, but he's also bringing in, kind of more up-and-coming guys that are good with recruiting. Robert Gillespie, from UNC, like guys like that, that it's kind of a good mix of the staff. So it's not just, if you brought in just NFL coaches or just really high, older, experienced coaches, it might overload that. I think he's also done a good job of mixing it, together as well.
And I think another thing that gets lost a little bit sometimes because of the high profile nature of the coaches is the job he does getting analysts. I mean, he gets these former head coaches to come in on low salaries because they're being paid by their former school, and they work as analysts for him, and they're just back there doing projects and different things to help the program get better. In some cases, maybe they're helping game planning and things like that. And he finds roles for them that help advance the program as well. And he has an endless budget. Like, they don't ever tell him you can't hire somebody. I think there's like a limit of 12 of those guys or something. So like he just really just runs a great program. And that's why Alabama is in the top every single year. So, all right. So you mentioned some of these guys that are the next generation of Alabama players. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that's who Miami is going to be facing in the season opener in Atlanta in September. A lot of people don't really know what to expect from Alabama because of the losses. I think that we would be in agreement that they're going to reload, and Alabama is going to be one of the top couple teams in the country once again. And I think here in the next few minutes, we're going to explain to everybody why as we go through what's coming next. So let's start at quarterback. And obviously, Mac Jones was unbelievable this year. He had the receiving core, the weapons, he had the running back, the offensive line. Alabama's offense had it all this past season. There's no doubt about it. And now they got to rebuild it because of the graduation. So it's going to start at quarterback with Bryce Young. And he was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. Huge talent. I personally think that he is going to benefit from not having to come into Alabama and be the guy the minute he stepped foot on campus. Even though he had the 5-star status, he was able to sit back this past year and learn quite a bit. He kind of got a little derailed by the fact that there wasn't a spring practice, but he did play in 9 games and was 13 of 22 passing for 156 yards and a touchdown. We obviously really didn't get a chance to watch him very much. You did. What did you see from Bryce Young in that playing time, and then also what you were able to see, if any, on the practice field?
I think we didn't get to see him much on the practice field just because of the COVID restrictions. Yeah. So it's still kind of a little bit of a mystery to us. But we got those 22 pass attempts. Look, that there's no way to judge him in those that short of a sample period. And I know that there's some Alabama fans that have seen him. He took a lot of sacks last year. He forced a few throws. The 13 of 22 doesn't look that great. You could argue that he probably had 1 or 2 passes just flat out dropped, including a touchdown. That probably pads his stats. But look, at that point, 15 to 22, 13 to 22, it's still too little to judge him. I think there are some concerns among Alabama fans that because he took some sacks, because he forced some throws, but biggest thing that will benefit Bryce Young is it is his offense now. He's not coming in the third quarter or the fourth quarter with the game out of hand trying to impress with the little reps he has. I think as a freshman, a 5-star freshman, you come in, you try to prove yourself, and look, you're not given really great opportunities. Even when he is able to throw, a lot of times it's, run the ball when the defense is expecting a run to run out the clock, do it again. You got like a 3rd and 7. And yeah, you're going to try to make a play on a 3rd and 7. So you're going to try to force a throw, or you're going to take a sack. And I just don't think that's necessarily the best way to judge a young quarterback. Obviously with the all SEC schedule, Alabama didn't really have a choice. They had to play teams deep into games, and they really couldn't there wasn't that easy game, early in the season to kind of give Bryce a lot of reps and to really see what he can do. I think you give him a spring to kind of get comfortable, to really own the offense. I think you're going to start to see the 5-star dual threat kind of guy that Alabama recruited. And you saw flashes of that last year too. He had 2 really good throws against Kentucky. I remember he had one across the field, dropped in a dime, probably like 30 or 40 yard bomb. And then he had another one where he kind of scrambled and hit Devontae Smith for a touchdown. So he's a guy that's shown he can do it. I think he needs to get that comfort level, and whether or not he gets that in the spring or maybe over the first couple of games, I think that'll be the question that Alabama would like him to get that obviously sooner than probably get him settled by the time they play Miami.
You talked about the offense, and with O'Brien coming in, we don't really know what the offense is going to look like. But the thing that I've been impressed with at Alabama through the years is how they adapt to their talent. Like it's not just Alabama's offense; it's an offense that they adapt to the players that they have, that they're going to be putting on the field. And it starts with the quarterback. Like, Jalen Hurts was not Tua. They were 2 different players, and they would adapt to each of them. Mac Jones was different than probably both of those 2 guys. So, more of the pure pocket passer. Well, now you have Bryce Young coming in, and there's no question that the Alabama offense with Bryce Young under center is going to change from what we saw this past season with Mac Jones and what we saw in the past, with Tua and with Jalen Hurts and their other quarterbacks through the years. Like, he's more mobile. He can do, things better than what those guys can do. So Bill O'Brien, it's going to be interesting because he's coming in kind of like with, the pro game, and, but he did have, Deshaun Watson and is kind of used to a quarterback like this that can move. It's going to be interesting to watch what type of offense he installs to take advantage of Bryce Young's talent. But obviously a 5-star coming in, very much heralded out of high school. And there's every expectation, I think, that Bryce Young, will develop into the next in line quality quarterback at Alabama. So that, we'll get the first real big look in Atlanta Labor Day weekend. All right, now running back, it's been the same deal at Bama. You guys just keep cycling these guys through. Like, it's not, I mean, it's really been unbelievable. The thing that I've been impressed with is not just how great these running backs at Alabama have been, but how big and physical they all are. They don't recruit small guys. It's a big, on our message boards with our fans, I'm always talking big about the importance of talent evaluation. It's not just about the stars that kids have. It's evaluating what you want in your program, and I think they do a great job of that with running backs at Alabama. They don't want a 5'8" scat back. They want big, physical, badass dudes that are going to win for you when the going gets tough against the better teams, and it pays off every single time. And Najee Harris was obviously the latest example. All right, so now we get to the heir apparent. Who's coming up next? And I know that Brian Robinson is a guy that is getting a lot of notoriety up there. Is he the guy that you see getting the first shot here this fall, or is there somebody else coming up from behind him that people should watch out for?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because on paper, since Brian Robinson's electing to come back for his extra year of eligibility, you would think he'd be the guy. I mean, he's always been kind of buried behind someone else. He hasn't necessarily set the world on fire, and he's kind of from what he was expected. He's a Tuscaloosa kid. He was a local hero here. He hasn't really risen to that level, and maybe this is his year. But I think he's probably the leader heading into camp, but I don't necessarily think he's it's not the same thing with Najee where it's totally his job even coming into camp. I think there's plenty of guys that could kind of fight for that role. I don't know where Trey Sanders is going to be coming back off his hip injury. We didn't really get too much information off of that. I know he's involved in a car accident in early November, and he's a guy that's just had terrible luck, but he's a 5-star guy that's really talented, showed a lot of promise. Another guy out of Texas, a freshman last year. I don't know what they're going to classify him now that the COVID kind of messed up the years, but a second-year player in Jace Mcclellan is another guy to watch. He was probably the best freshman on, of the running backs last year. You saw him break some big runs late in games, and he made the most out of his opportunities. And he's a guy that I think, could maybe even compete for that starting job. And I know this sounds unfair, but you said that Alabama doesn't have a scat back. Well, they actually do. He's a guy named Keelan Robinson. He opted out last year, but the year before, this past season, the year before that.
They've been stashing him off to the side. All right.
Yeah, he made some huge runs. He's kind of like the Nick Saban. Every time he talks about Keelan Robinson, he always says the same phrase, but he says he brings the juice. And he's just a guy that you can kind of like really change the pace, like really fast. It's kind of really high praise, but maybe like, kind of like, how the Alabama used Kenyon Drake as like a burner. You could put him in the passing game a little bit, and he was just so much different than maybe like a Derrick Henry. And I think you can do that with Keelan Robinson too. You put him in the receiving game, or just have him as a change of pace out of the backfield. So yeah, I mean, they have guys coming out of the walls at Alabama in the running backs now.
So Robinson, he had 483 yards last year, 6 touchdowns on 91 carries. I mean, that's not too shabby. He's a little bit of a threat in the passing game. I mean, didn't really do a ton, but he did catch 6 passes, and he returned 3 kickoffs. So he's a guy that he's been there. They've been working him in, and now he'll get a shot. But Alabama is going to have 2-3 other guys coming up from behind him that are most likely going to challenge him at some point. So that'll be something to watch as we go through practice in the spring and fall and point towards the opener. I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about that down the road. All right, you mentioned Mechie earlier, a guy that's very intriguing to me. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on receivers at Bama. The standard of excellence has been unbelievable. Unfortunately, a lot of it's been on the backs of Miami, because a lot of these guys have come from South Florida. And that hasn't resonated very well down here, but it's a fact. I mean, they've gotten great receivers, and you look at Ridley, Judy, Devonta Smith. What he did last year. It's just been one after the other. All right, so Mechie's next up. He had 55 catches this year, 916 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But now he's got to replace the Heisman Trophy winner. Okay, and that's a whole different ball game. Can John Mechie live up to the standard of receivers at Alabama, or should we look for a younger guy coming up that will maybe take that pressure off of him and be a little bit more than just a complimentary guy?
I don't think John Mechie is going to be the next Devontae Smith next year or anything like that, or the next Jerry Jeudy or something like that. I think he's going to be Alabama's number 1 receiver, and I think he'll be good, but I think Alabama's going to spread the ball out a lot more. I think they're going to need to. I mean, look, last year when you looked at it, Devontae Smith was always open. You put 5 guys on him, and somehow he just, warped somewhere else on the field and be wide open. So I don't think John Mechie is going to necessarily do that, but I don't think there's very many receivers that can do that. When you're looking at Alabama's receiving, depth, it's a lot of talented guys, but not a lot of experience. I think there's a guy named, Javon Baker, and you saw him a little bit last year, but he didn't really get a chance to make an impact just because Alabama stuck with that core group. I think he's a guy that could step in as far as returning players. You've got Slade Bolden, who's kind of crafty out of the slot. I think he could start at slot at the beginning of the season, but the 2 freshmen they're bringing in at that slot position, that's where I think, you might see, if you're looking for a freshman to kind of make an impact, I think either Christian Leary or JoJo Earl, 2 really shifty guys, kind of in the model of Henry Ruggs and Jalen Waddle, where they're just super fast and shifty and can kind of really excel in that slot role. I think that's a big time, just based on the Alabama's need at the slot position. I think that's probably where I would look. Obviously from the Miami area, you guys are pretty familiar with Jacory Brooks, and I think Alabama's expecting big things from him. Ajee Hall as well. So I think that
You
one of
had to
those
bring
guys.
that. You had to bring that up, didn't you? You just had to bring them up.
I mean, they're good. They're talented guys. I'm expecting
But
a
you
lot
didn't
from
have
them.
to mention Jacory Brooks. He hasn't done a dang thing yet. Okay, you didn't have to crush us with that, because that's another one from Miami that got away and is going to Bama. But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yes. I think Jacory Brooks might be the best out of all of them. It's just, I think because you have Mechie and Javon Baker coming in as those outside guys, they're a little bit more established. And this is no diss to Slade Bolden, who's probably got the most he's got the most catches. He's got more catches than Javon Baker. I just think that Slade Bolden might be passed up. I look at the talent of Christian Leary and JoJo Earl, and I just think like those guys are too good to keep off the field. So they might kind of step into that slot role as the season goes along.
All right. The offensive line at Bama has just been unbelievable for several years now. Another one of our Miami guys, Mario Cristobal, was up there for a few years and built a stable of linemen before he left for Oregon. And they've just been able to continue recruiting great players there. But they got to replace a lot. And, they got to replace Alex Leatherwood, who was, obviously a foundation for that line. He won the Outland Trophy. So I know Evan Neal is going to be a big part of whatever happens. I've been talked that he might switch sides, I guess, and take the left tackle spot now. And what's the offensive line for Bama looking like in 2021?
So Alabama loses 3 starters from last year, and that's pretty big, especially with 2 team captains and Alex Leatherwood and Landon Dickerson's the guy I think a lot of people forget. It's gonna be it's gonna be interesting. They also bring in probably the best offensive line class they've signed under Nick Saban. They've got 2 5-star guys, 2 top 10 guys, and J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockermeyer. You might expect one of those guys to compete for a starting spot, from the gate. I think you mentioned it with Evan Neal. Alabama's model has been kind of move when your left tackle leaves. If you have like that big star guy at right tackle, to move him to left tackle makes sense, because would be all 3 of Alabama's quarterbacks. It's going to be Bryce Young, but they're all right-handers. You'd want that blind side protected. I think you might even move the right guard Emil Ekiar Jr. to the left guard position too. 1, he's used to playing alongside Evan Neal, and then 2, just add that extra strong side protection, the blind side protection for Bryce Young. One of the benefits Alabama has, if they like to go this way, is Chris Owens is coming back. He was a redshirt senior last year, but he's coming back for his extra COVID year, I guess you want to call it. He's an established guy that can play both at tackle or at center. I've always said this, I like having that kind of leadership at center. If you look back at Alabama's team captains, more often than not, they're from the center position. So I like having him at center. There's a lot of options with younger guys they could put. There's a guy named Darian Dalcourt. They could move in at center. And then, you got to look at, they got a 6'7" guy named Tommy Brown who's played at tackle and guard. I slotted him in our depth chart to the right guard position. And then J.C. Latham or Tommy Brockermeyer at that right tackle position. But look, the crazy thing is they've got a slew of 4- and 5-star talents that they can just plug in. Alabama's been pretty good at getting people to play multiple positions and teaching them multiple positions on the offensive line. So I think it's just a matter of finding the 5 guys that gel the best together. And look, now you've got Doug Marrone coaching that unit, an NFL coach. So he should be able to figure it out. He's certainly got the talent to work with.
Yeah, it's incredible that they're able to bring a coach with that kind of pedigree in to coach their offensive line. It's just it's awe-inspiring. But all right, so they only gave up 11 sacks last year. So there's a big standard for the new guys coming in to live up to. That will clearly be one of the factors in the game in September. I mean, it's a while off, but I know Miami, for Alabama, it's probably just another opener. For Miami fans, it's a big deal. I mean, getting a chance to play Alabama on a national stage, it's going to be a great report card for the Miami program to get a gauge of where it's at. I love when they schedule these games because Miami's probably not going to win it. They're going to be an underdog, but I love barometer games. They give the coaches, they give the administration just an opportunity to assess where the program is, because if you don't do that, how can you get better? And it's like, Miami got some rude awakenings here the last couple of years, and it put the onus on them to make the program better. And I think they've done that. I think Miami's going to bring the best coaching staff that it's had in a long time up to Atlanta to match wits with Bama's coaching staff. And I don't think they're going to have the roster to match with Bama, but they're going to have to find ways to do some different things. And clearly the matchup of Manny Diaz's aggressive defensive schemes against the Alabama young offensive line and a young quarterback is going to be a very critical factor in that game. And if Miami's going to stay close, it's going to have to be because Manny Diaz is able to draw up enough defense to give these young Alabama offensive players problems and keep the score total down low. Because I'm now going to shift gears and talk to you a little bit about the Bama defense real quick. And that's where it starts to get scary, not just for Miami, but I think for pretty much every team that Bama is going to play next year, because it was a unit that was in development this year. And when you watched Bama play from the beginning to the end of the season, you saw the steady improvement on the defensive side of the ball. And by the end of the year, when they're playing for it all, that was a pretty damn good defense. Now, they lose Christian Barmore, who was extremely impressive. They lose Dylan Moses, who obviously another very good player. And they lose Patrick Surtain at cornerback, who was a very good cornerback. But Nick Saban can recruit defensive backs. I don't think that's an issue. But once you get past that, everybody's back. And I think that gives Alabama probably the deepest returning defense in the country. Loads of talent at all three levels. And Miami loves its new up-tempo spread offense. Miami is going to have a lot of good skill players this year, and hopefully De'Ara King makes it back for the opener. That's kind of in question. If he doesn't, it's going to be a long day for Miami, in my opinion. But it's going to just be interesting to see how Miami's stable of athletes matches up against a really good defense, and that's going to be one of the intriguing factors. So it starts up front. Okay, they have 6 guys back with significant game experience, and that's absolutely huge. They have a lot of flexibility with LeBrian Ray and Phil Mathis and those guys. Give us a quick synopsis of what you think Alabama's defensive line and really front seven. You can even go to the linebackers and the defensive ends and just give us a general synopsis of what you think the Alabama defense is going to look like now with yet another year of experience and development in the front seven.
So Alabama switches its defensive line in and out depending on different, packages and stuff. But the key names to know: LeBrian Ray looks like he's coming back. You got guys like Byron Young, Justin Aboigbe, and Phil Mathis. Those guys are just now, like you said, some of those guys were young still last year. They were second-year players last year. At least Byron Young and Justin Aboigbe, where now that everyone I mentioned they're veterans. So you're going to have on those defensive end positions, they're established now. DJ Dale's the nose guard. He's coming into his third year with the program. He started the first 2 years. You got a guy named Tim Smith, who's really talented after him, and he could really push even DJ Dale for that defensive tackle role. So they're really experienced. I don't know if there's like a wow guy on the defensive three. But I think that there's a lot of, there's a lot of veteran experience. And then, I think that should kind of help out. What really sets this pass rush apart is when you get into these outside linebackers who, might play, on the line. But you look at Christopher Allen, an outside linebacker who led the SEC in tackles for a loss last year. He elected to come back. That's going to be huge. And then Alabama, in my opinion, has the most talented defender, young defender in the nation, and Will Anderson Jr. I think he's a future top 5 pick. He's just crazy. Wow. You saw him lead all freshmen in sacks, and he didn't have one until well late into the season. It seemed like in November he just really picked it up, and then he had a sack every single game. He's outstanding, 5-star kid. And I just think that it's really going to be his defense, to be honest with you. I think he's, if you even want to call him a breakout player, Will Anderson, that's my guy for that role. But I think with him and Allen coming off the edge, it really is scary, like you said, for opposing offenses, because I think Alabama is going to be able to get to the quarterback a lot more this year.
All right. And, I got to bring up a sore spot. Miami fans aren't going to be thrilled about, this conversation either, but defensive back is a place where Alabama has just killed Miami in taking these quality players out of South Florida. I mentioned Surtain, Jordan Battle at safety. Now for Alabama is another one. Josh Jobe, I know he's had some ups and downs at times, and that but he still is starting at cornerback now for Alabama. So you can assume that he would have been starting at Miami, and a continuation of pretty good talent and play in the secondary. But they do have to fill a couple spots. So once you get past Battle at safety and Jobe at corner, how good do you think Alabama can be in the secondary?
I think that second cornerback spot's really interesting. And like, what does Alabama want to do with that? You look at, talk about people that did well last year. Malachi Moore in the nickelback, or Alabama calls it a star position. He was great, and he looks like the next Minka Fitzpatrick at that position. I don't know if you move him out of that spot to play corner. I wouldn't. I'd keep him at that nickelback position just because he's just manned it so well. I think when you look, Alabama's got a pair of JUCO players. Ronald Williams Jr. didn't play too much last year, but he came in from JUCO, and then they're getting a guy named Kyrie Jackson. He's like a 6'2", 180-pound guy from Last Chance U from East Mississippi. Nick Saban doesn't generally bring in JUCO players unless they're going to make an impact. So I kind of project one of those two guys to fill that second cornerback spot, but that's a spot that, if you're looking at a weakness, that it needs to be filled. I really like Josh Jobe at the cornerback position. I think he was kind of he really had a quiet, or maybe an underrated year last year. So I think he's pretty solid. You look at that safety position, like you said, Jordan Battle, he's got that spot, locked down. You're looking at DeMarco Helms or possibly even Brian Branch, stepping into that other safety role. Brian Branch played out of the money position, which is actually just the dime back position in Alabama's unit. He could start alongside Battle. They could give it to DeMarco Helms, who seemed to do pretty well last year. They've got some talent. These are all, like I said, 4-star kind of kids. It's not there's holes, but I don't necessarily think Alabama's going to have to like reshape the secondary like it has in recent years. And I think they've got enough leadership now with Battle and Jobe that it should be able to kind of fill those and then gel pretty quickly as well.
All right, so I think that gives people a pretty good synopsis of where Alabama is as they go into the offseason. And obviously, it's going to be one of the better teams in college football. They just stack recruiting classes on top of recruiting classes. Some of these guys that people haven't heard about yet are going to be household names a year from now. I don't think there's any question about it. And it's going to take, obviously, a yeoman's effort by Miami to be in the game in the fourth quarter. But, that's something I think that you and I can address maybe once we get to August and see, better where Alabama is heading into the season with some of these young players on offense and how far along it appears they are. So before I let you go, one final question. Nick Saban decides he's going to come back for another year. You guys that cover Alabama, how much longer do you guys see Nick Saban inflicting this absolute pain on the rest of college football with the way he runs this program and brings it back year after year?
They keep on asking him, they asked him on National Signing Day, when is he going to retire? Does he have any plans? And he said no time soon. He kind of made a joke that he's just like Tom Brady and he has no plans of ever retiring, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's anytime soon. He continues to say that whenever he feels like he's not making a positive impact on the program, then that's when he'll step down. Well, I mean, he's certainly making a positive impact on the program right now, so I don't expect that to be anytime soon. Look, I don't think this is going to be anytime soon, but this is how I think it's going to eventually go down. I think that whenever Nick Saban can't recruit, we talked about this at the beginning of the show. Whenever Nick Saban can't recruit, I think that's going to start diminishing at one point. Or at least you got to think, right? And then you're going to maybe start seeing it on the field. And I think at that point, however many years down the road this is, that's when I think you'll really see Nick Saban start to evaluate things and say, can I recruit at the same level? And is that affecting me on the field? And is it time to hang it up? But as long as he's pulling in the number one class and going undefeated in all SEC schedules and stuff, I don't think there's any chance of him retiring in the next, at least
like
3 years. I mean, I don't see that, and that's being pretty
Yeah,
modest
why?
for 3. Yeah.
Yeah, his house is already a resort. He's got the lake, he's got homes when he wants to get away. He can play golf whenever he wants. I mean,
he doesn't like being off. Like, that's the thing. It's like, it's not like, it's not like one of these things where he's like, oh man, I want to have, time off, but I can't stop coaching or whatever. He does it. He gets bothered by having time off. So this is almost his vacation, is, staying up late in the coaching office and figuring out, 18 different ways to stop, De'Aaron King. I mean, that is his off, like that is his holiday, so.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Tony. Well, we really appreciate your time today. I think, everyone totally is appreciative of the insight that you've given everybody into Alabama. A lot of excitement down here in the 305 to have a game like this to point to start a new season. And it's great for everybody to have a little bit of a feel for what Miami's dealing with here as it goes through the offseason, and points towards a game that everyone's going to be watching. And I know Miami's hoping to go up there and represent itself a little bit better than maybe it has in some of these other big games it's had against Clemson and LSU's of the world. And it's going to be a good subplot for us down here during the offseason to see how the Miami team comes together and whether it looks like something that can challenge Bama a little bit, if not pull an upset in September. So he's Tony Tsoukalas and from BamaInsider.com joining us today on CaneSport's Inside the Lines. And we thank all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time, everybody.